Hello, everyone, and welcome to So Very Wrong About Games, a board gaming podcast about board games. With me, as always, me being Mark Bigney, is Michael Walker. How you doing, Walker?
That's me. I'm doing great.
I'm glad to hear it. We have an update. This is an update about Planet Unknown. I have been talking about Planet Unknown for some time. It's without the expansion. It is a good time. It is a fun polyomino tile layer. And it's got a lazy Susan. And I commented several times that Susan is presented as an acronym, but it is not specified what that stands for. And I was informed by a listener that they, of course, there is this information. Adam's Apple Games has clarified what Susan stands for in the context of an acronym, and they put it where all the most important information can be for a board game. You might be thinking, oh, the rulebook? No, of course not. Back of the box? No. Front of the box? No. Everyone knows that where you put the really crucial information, update 28. That's where the key stuff goes.
Crowdfunding update.
Crowdfunding update number 28 is where you stick the most important information.
FAQs.
The FAQs.
Rules errata. All that errata, good stuff.
Absolutely. Everyone knows. Update 28, that's where you put it. So Susan actually means simultaneous unit selection axial node.
Well, of course, right? We should have been able to suss that out, really.
Well, as a lover of stupid bad acronyms, I appreciate this, and I appreciate that I now know what it is. I will probably forget. Maybe I'll just scroll it into my rulebook so that, because, yeah, I'm a freak. I like the information like that in a rulebook rather than update 28. But I should know. Everyone always prints out update 28 and saves it in their board game boxes because that's where all the important stuff is.
Chinese New Year, all that stuff.
Oh, the Chinese New Year posts, where you commit to memory because everyone wants the 517th explanation for what happens in China.
We had no idea it was coming.
It's
took
a surprise
us by surprise.
Every single time.
We didn't realize it was this time of year.
Precisely. So, This is a board gaming podcast about board games. We're going to be talking about the games we played last week. We're going to talk about the news and why it doesn't matter. And we're going to close things out with our feature game, which is SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So, Walker, what did you play last week?
Mark, we played a group of games. This is going to be a group of games brought out by CMYK. These are the people that brought us Wilmot's Warehouse, Lacuna, Spots, Daybreak.
Wavelength.
And they're calling it their Magenta set. I know this is going to sound like an ad or something, but anyway, this is a big release by CMYK. It's 4 card games. They've sort of said they're going to put out one a year into this sort of Magenta set, they've called it. And these are reprints of card games in this nice, magenta-colored box.
It is very magenta. One cannot deny that if you line them all up, this is the kind of thing with a new product line. They want you to line them all up and then kind of feel some sort of additional sales pressure to get the next one because it'll line up with the rest of them. It is a very hot magenta. This is a neon magenta. This is like late 80s, early 90s stuff going on here.
So the first one we're going to talk about is called Fruit Fight. This is a reprint of a Reiner Knizia game called No Mercy. And it is very similar to Flip 7. Except in this one, you are flipping up fruits, and the deck is not weirdly mixed like Flip 7. It's all the same number of fruit. The difference in this one is that you are going to score points if you still have fruit in front of you when it comes back to your turn. And you won't have fruit in front of you because when it's someone else's turn, they flip up a fruit that matches what you have, you're going to lose that to them. But if they keep pushing their luck and they flip a fruit that is equal to one of the fruits that they have, their turn is done.
I vastly prefer this to Flip 7. I'd forgotten about it. I played it under the version called Cheeky Monkey, which was published in the early 90s. And it has 2 virtues, I think, when compared to Flip 7. One of them is that you don't have the, quite frankly, ludicrous action cards, which I think are just a step too far. I mean, yes, Flip 7 is a very, very, very light social experience, but I think the action cards are just a step way past where they need to go. And on top of that, I enjoy Fruit Fight because there's kind of a granularity to the pushing your luck element. There's often a target that you want to hit. Someone's sitting there with, 5 bananas in front of them, and so you really want to hit it so you can steal all those cards.
Well, not only that, you just don't want them to. You don't want them to score all those cards.
Well, that too.
That's what I found too. Is it's yet another pressure to push your luck. Like
Absolutely.
You said, yeah.
And so it adds an additional level of texture to the push your luck decisions. And so, speaking personally, I get all the same enjoyment that I get out of Flip 7, but I find that there's actually more substance in terms of a game. It's still very light, of course, but Reiner Knizia does push your luck better than almost any other designer currently working. And yes, it's themeless, and the fruit doesn't really have a whole lot of... Lord help me, Walker. I was about to say appeal. I was about to say appeal. I don't know why it didn't occur to me, but now that I've cottoned onto it, and aren't you glad I didn't go down that road?
I know, you almost left a pit in my stomach.
There you go. So Fruit Fight is unfortunately the first time we played at the max player count, which is 5. I guess that is one virtue that Flip 7
I was about to say, I was waiting for you to finally finish to say that I think there is room for both. I think with player count, I think there is a reason, because with more people in Fruit Fight, it becomes a little bit weird, because there's sometimes, you sometimes feel there's no reason keeping any cards in front of you, because by the time it comes back around to you, people have definitely just flipped up cards that you have, and you have no cards in front of you anyway. So it doesn't quite work with a lot of people, but I think 4 or less is great, and then Flip 7 can take over with more players than that.
Yeah, I was very pleased to be reminded of Fruit Fight / Cheeky Monkey. And, given your enthusiasm for Flip 7, as I say, I think it's got a lot of the same drama, a lot of the same appeal, but it doesn't have quite the same level of ridiculous arbitrariness. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of luck involved. It's a push your luck game. You might bust at completely inopportune moments, but I thoroughly enjoy Fruit Fight.
The next one is called Fives, which Mark is going to tell us about.
So on the back of the box, it says 5s, 5s, 5s across the board. Look, I'm as enthusiastic about ballroom culture as the next person, and I appreciate the reference. But frankly, 5s across the board would be what we call massive shade. That would be a tremendous insult to somebody. But anyway, moving past that, 5s is a trick-taking game where any card can be used as a magenta 5. You're not obliged to follow suit by turning a card into a magenta 5, but you always have that option. Why would you care about this? Well, because the scoring is very restrictive, albeit not in the traditional way that trick-taking games can be restrictive. So if you think about a lot of your traditional card games, whether it's bridge, whether it's spades, any of the auction-type card games where you have to bid, or even Ghosts of Christmas with its ridiculously restrictive bidding system, in the context of 5s, what you want to do is end with a final score every hand as close to possible as 25 without going over, where what you score is the card with which you won the trick. And so you get in these situations where, you're sitting on the 9, the 8, or something of it. It's like, yeah, you can win those tricks, sure. But then you're in a position where everyone else on the table is going to conspire to make you bust. And when everyone has access to magenta 5s, it's very easy, well, more easy than a lot of trick-taking games, to feed someone a trick that they don't want to win. And that tension, that evolving tension, is great, because I particularly like in the middle of a hand in 5s, about halfway through the hand, everyone's looking around. It's like, okay, well, I'm sitting at 17. Someone's sitting at 5. Someone else is sitting at 23. And you start wondering who's going to bust and when. It's really well done. I found it clever. And it is a shockingly effective twist on a lot of conventional trick-taking standards.
Yeah, there's another time where the timing really matters and the pressure's on, is because only one magenta 5 can be played. Per trick. So if you're trying to, get rid of high card, you could, and you might think you're going to be able to I'll just play this as a 5. But then suddenly someone else leads with a 5, or someone else plays a 5, and now you're just stuck throwing this out, busting yourself. It is a great trick-taking game. So what was this used to be called, Mark?
5s used to be called the Green Fivura. This is designed by Taiki Shinzawa.
Now, he has designed 43 games, a lot of them card games, big ones that we've heard of before, like Masked Men and Ghosts of Christmas. This is a great game, 5s.
Yes, and it's interesting. I'm actually surprised that more of these card games weren't actually from Japan, because all the 4 games so far in the Magenta line are very much in sort of the Japanese card game idiom, which is to say a couple of novel twists, but nonetheless very accessible in terms of rule set, and quick to play and approachable.
The next one up is called Figment. This used to be called Illusion. This is designed by Wolfgang Walsh of Quacks and Quigglingbird and the Clever series, Wavelength, The Mind. Now, Illusion is a great cooperative game. You are going to set a color at the beginning of the round, And then you're going to start flipping these sort of abstract shapes that have 4 different colors on them, but all sort of different percentages of them. And you have to arrange them in order of most to least. And on the back of these cards, it'll tell you the percentage of how much pink is in this card. And so you need, and say, let's say pink was the color that we flipped up. So we have to arrange
magenta.
Magenta.
I think you'll find that it's magenta.
Magenta. Let's say it was magenta we flipped up. So we have to arrange these cards in order of, most magenta to least magenta. And you'd think that would be easy. It is not. The weird
it's
sort of
very difficult.
spirally pictograph, mutilated pictures that they have of these different shapes with these 5 different colors. It is a great cooperative game, and I had a blast playing it. It is called Figment.
One of the things that I appreciate about games like Figment is that it tests skills or aptitudes that are not commonly tapped in the context of hobby board games, right? I think about the classic example of this is, some people really hate dexterity games. We love dexterity games. We love part of what I love about dexterity games is that they are somewhat novel in that they don't test the same sort of strategic or tactical muscles, for lack of a better term, that we often use in other kinds of hobbyist games. I remember a game called Mord im Arosa, where you had to judge how far a cube fell down a tower based on the sound that it made. And I love games that just ask you to do things in a new way. And Figment is absolutely trying to make you evaluate, based on some sort of visual estimation, the total surface area occupied in a weird design, different color mixtures. This is not a thing that I've ever really had to do before. And it was very disorienting in a pleasant way. And you'd have these moments of discovery where it's like, only 16% of that card is silver? That's wild. Here we are putting cards next to each other and lining up, trying to guesstimate the circumference of a circle versus the total surface area of a rhombus on a different... It's really strange. And I was surprised by how engaging it was. It's one of those cooperative games where you're playing by committee, and so people who are averse to such things should probably stay away. But there is an extra added little wrinkle in that you, at the end of the round, get to try to guess how confident you are that you got everything right in an attempt to get bonus points. And I appreciated that detail as well.
Yeah, and you get to pick from the other side. Like I said, it's from most to least, and so you decide which end you want to start at. So you think you got it, really close from, the least part, then you can start at that end or the most part and, try to get more points that way. I like it.
The last game in the Magenta line is Duos. This is by Johannes Schmidauer-König, and it was originally published as a game called Team Play. And this is indeed for precisely 4 or 6 players operating in teams of 2. And this is a very simple game of drawing cards to satisfy various missions that you might have in front of you. Like, for example, 2 unique pairs, or 2 unique pairs of odd cards, or 1 pair of blue cards and 1 pair of magenta cards, or what have you. The additional wrinkle is that you can pass cards to your teammate. And so you have to start making inferences or guesses about what a certain player is looking for or what will help them out or be able to communicate to them what it is that you need. And ultimately, it's a relatively simple game, but the extra little detail there, again, is trying to work with your partner to be slightly more efficient and score cards faster than the other team can.
Yeah, I love it. It's like you said, yet another great card game. All 4 of these games are super solid. So if you are short on card games, man, this set is perfect. I'm not saying that there's not one of them that jumps out as, a fantastic game in its field, but they're all very solid.
Yeah, they're good to have around. Like, as somebody with a game collection, you'd absolutely want games of this ilk, preferably more than one, that can be pulled out, explained in 5 minutes, played in a very, very quick period of time. And I'm hard-pressed to identify a favorite among them. I mean, part of me is really, really impressed with Figment. As I say, I like the novelty. Duos and 5s are those things where, in the abstract, stepping outside it doesn't seem like it's going to amount to much, but when you're actually playing it, it's just very, very smooth and pleasant, and giving you a little bit of trade-offs and difficult decisions. And Fruit Fight is, it's a Reiner Knizia press your luck game, so I'm naturally inclined to appreciate it, and I've enjoyed it off and on for years now. This is a very solid lineup of games. I was looking at the press release that CMYK sent us, and because these are all review copies, it's worth emphasizing. And they say, look, what we want with the Magenta line is, iconic, timeless, family weight card games. And it's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Every time CMYK puts something out, it's always like, I remember very distinctly when they did it with Wavelength. Wavelength, they said you're going to feel like you're telepathic. I'm like, whatever. This is just press copy. Wilmot's Warehouse, like, you're going to tell a story that's somehow going to let you anchor all these deals. Like, yeah, sure. I constantly doubt them. I don't know that I would classify these card games as all being timeless, right? That's a little bit hyperbolic. But in terms of getting that sweet spot of that filler that's more satisfying than it ought to be, while still being super approachable, they've absolutely made excellent editorial choices in this Magenta line.
Yeah, they found these games, like, these are all reprints. So they found these games that either, didn't get released enough or didn't get enough push. And I'm hoping now that they'll get out there and people will enjoy them again.
Oh, they're all worth additional attention, that is for certain. Yeah. And I'm very curious to see if this line is successful, where it's going to go. So this is the Magenta line, Fruit Fight 5s, Figment, and Duos. And it is available for pre-order as of the airing of this episode, February 11th. And they plan on shipping them out on February the 25th. And so that is the Magenta line by CMYK. I got to play Sidereal Confluence. Sidereal Confluence, trading and negotiation in the Elysian Quadrant, as sometimes people tease me by insisting on using the full title.
How many players?
We played with 5. So 5 is a relatively solid economy, but with a couple of weird edge cases. So I'm willing to play Sidereal Confluence with 4. But with 4, the economy is going to be weird. There's going to be a kind of cube that the system is utterly starved for, generally speaking. Sometimes 2. In the context of a 5-player game of Sidereal Confluence, you're often going to have a little bit of inequality. I mean, there's obviously going to be some grit. It is never the case that at any given game state of Sidereal Confluence that all cubes are equally valuable to everybody. If that were the case, then there wouldn't be a reason to trade. In the context of this game, we had both the Eniet, who are the charitable squid whales, and we had the Photoron, and both of those economies love having white cubes, and so there was a very, very strong shortage of white cubes. But navigating those weaknesses, those asymmetries, those lacunae, are part and parcel of what make understanding every emergent economy of Sidereal Confluence fun. There were a lot of new players. One thing that I did not expect is what it did to the personality of one of the players at the table, because Sidereal Confluence has, I think, accurately been described as a competitive game where whoever cooperates the best wins. And generally speaking, even people who initially approach it as a haggling game, as a game where you really got to be vicious and exact that marginal edge over your opponent, they quickly change their tune, because it is about finding the best deals so that everyone can profit, and then just engaging in more of those deals better than everyone else. And then there was how Il Lupo responded. So Il Lupo were playing the Kalion. They weren't even playing the Zeth. And he sits there, and Il Lupo, you have to understand, is a very soft-spoken guy. Very nice, very supportive, very generous. But Sidereal Confluence brought out a side of him that I'd never seen before. So we were engaging in trades, and he looked at us and said, hey, those cubes, give them to me. It's like, no, I'm not. I would trade for them. It's like, I might trade with you. Give me those cubes. It was bizarre. I had never encountered such behavior before. It kind of maybe this is the real Il Lupo. Maybe I've never really known him. Maybe this is the real side to him. It was an interesting experience, as it always is. I adore Sidereal Confluence. I know we'll play it anytime. We did not play with any of the expansion races, in part because there was a large number of new players there. I probably could have played one of the simpler expansion races just to try them. It's always the same. I've commented on this before. 9 times out of 10, I'm teaching Sidereal Confluence, I'm setting it up, and then when the explanation is done, I don't then feel like causing everyone to wait 5 minutes while I internalize how the new expansion faction works, so I get to play as one. Consequently, I've never played as an expansion faction, and the expansion remains underused. It's sad. Weep for me, Walker.
I am. See the single tear?
Yeah.
That's for you.
I thought that's because you murdered a gang informant. I'm getting confused.
No comment.
So that was Sidereal Confluence by TauCeti Deichmann, published by Wizkids in 2017, which was a beautiful year for board games.
We got to get Fishing by Freedom Freeze back to the table. This is his sort of take on trick-taking games. This is put out by, surprisingly, 2F Spiel. And how it works is every round, it is on a card that tells you how many cards you're going to draw. And your draw pile is equal to how many cards you won in the previous round. So if you didn't win any tricks, your draw pile is going to be 0, and you get to draw from the Special deck.
Ooh, how is it special, Walker?
It's super special. Like the initial deck, believe goes like from 1 to 9.
1 to 10.
1 to 10, and then the special deck, it's graduated. So it starts going up to, 11, 12, 13, and eventually gets up to 15. Also has boy cards in it, which, change things up.
Oh, yeah.
Also has the trump cards that are slowly brought into, has 0 cards, which is you steal 1 card. So all sorts of fun. Very boisterous once again. I think it is a hit all round. It seems to fall apart a little bit in the last, I would say, 2 rounds, because sometimes the mix gets so much that normal trick-taking enjoyment sort of gets removed, where you're trying to make everyone lose all the colors of one suit, and the planning and sort of strategizing that you would do in normal trick-taking goes out the window.
The available cards start to vastly outstrip the total hand sizes of everyone at the table. And so we ended up in our particular case in the last round of 3 of the 4 players being void in several suits at the start of the hand, which is wild. And so consequently, it is difficult to fall back on traditional trick-taking intuitions. Now, on top of not being able to follow traditional intuitions, I was very glad to play this for a second time, because the first time you play fishing, all bets are off. You have no idea what's going to happen. It's like a complete voyage of discovery. And there's a certain enjoyment in that, but as I commented, I hoped that things would stabilize a little bit. And sure enough, they did, aside from that additional wrinkle that we just identified. So, for example, that the moment anyone's dipped into that center deck, your 10 you can't rely on that being the highest of the suit anymore. You just have to know that. Sometimes you then have to wonder if you're sitting on the 11, but somebody else drew cards from the special deck after you. There's a chance that your 11 isn't the highest either. Sometimes the 12 isn't played, but it's more of a calculated risk. And so with this second play, we had additional information, and it seemed less wild during the middle parts and a little bit more wild at the end parts. And it was kind of a voyage of discovery in the same way, but within more certain parameters. And I very much appreciated it. Yeah, fishing, I think, has some legs.
And it brings out...
Fish with legs? Does that
mutants,
work?
Yeah, but I don't know.
Mutant fish? Okay.
It did bring out strategy. I talked about, purposely losing, and I did employ that in the last round of the game. I purposely lost in the second to last round. So
so you did that? You did that on purpose? You deliberately lost? You chose?
I did.
You looked at it and said, "I could get these points.
I was going to.
I could decide to get points.
Don't try
but
to pretend.
I'm going to decide not to. Louis looks like he's had a rough day. I'm going to give him a solid.
I got a few points because I did unfortunately have a bunch of zeros in my hand. So when zeros are played, you get to choose a card from the winning trick. So denying the winner a point, because your points are equal to 1 for every card that you've won for that round. So you get to choose, hopefully, a nice big card, and you put that into your score pile. But other than that, I'd lost everything else. So I drew almost my entire hand for the last round from the special deck. And super fun.
Yeah, it's weird. You want to... timing can utterly wreck you. I was in a position where I barely held on during the last couple of rounds because my very successful round was the anti-penultimate round. And so consequently, I didn't pull from the special deck ever again. And those cards will not cut it anymore unless you are very careful and or very lucky. I was very lucky in that particular case. And then on top of that, you have all these other boy effects. Like there's the one that I particularly loathe, but it's very good, where you can play it. You don't have to follow suit. You can always play a boy card. It just costs the winner of the trick 3 points. So if you're in a 4-player game, and you win a normal trick, normally that's 4 points. But if someone's poisoned it with the -3 point card, well then, that's only 1 point net. And I got 2 of those.
To make it even more sour, someone could throw in a 0.
Yep, and steal a card, and then you're at 0 for that, and the cards are all garbage. So, yeah, fishing is great. It's really well done. Friedemann Friese is one of the best designers working today in terms of the novelty of his releases, in terms of playing with ideas, and he's been messing around with kind of legacy within a single sitting elements for a long time now, and fishing is a great manifestation.
Yeah, so if you ever played Fortress, then it really has that feel of sort of this campaign all-in-one sitting type play.
Absolutely. That is Fishing by Friedemann Friese, published by 2F Spiel in 2024. I get to play a recently fulfilled Kickstarter campaign, The Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era. This is by Chip Theory Games. Chip Theory Games has decided to stop crediting individual designers. Instead, they credit a very large team. But in this case, we're talking about Josh J. Carlson, Michael Gernes, Logan Giannini, Ryan Howard, Salem Scott, and Josh Wielgus. And I backed it largely for two reasons. Number one, I have a certain degree of enthusiasm for the video game property of the Elder Scrolls. I'm a big fan of Morrowind and Oblivion. And then there's Skyrim, which is the one that everyone lost their heads over, but I prefer the other two. And I've actually played all the Elder Scrolls games except for Daggerfall, which is unfortunate because a lot of people say very good things about Daggerfall. And number two, it was presented as kind of being a riff on Too Many Bones. And I think that Too Many Bones is Chip Theory Games' best game, which is to say the only game of theirs that I've enjoyed. And I was curious to see how this could evolve. Now, what we've got is a very, very long game. It's presented as a 3-episode campaign. Each episode is advertised as saying 2 hours plus a half hour per player. That sounds about right.
Oof.
First game we had with 2 players was 4 hours, but there was a lot of looking back and forth because the rules, I will say this, the rules presentation isn't bad. It is very verbose, but it is seeking to be as clear and as explicit as possible. This is good because when you compare it to the way Too Many Bones often worked, where the asymmetry in each individual adventure would often introduce mechanisms unique to that adventure, and the sort of reference sheet that would accompany it would sometimes be insufficient and cause a great deal of confusion. And there are a lot of special asymmetric abilities in the Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era.
So did it give you the feel of any of the video games that you played?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that there's a lot of latitude to give you lots of different mutually possibly incompatible skills and have your character do lots of different things. Like, you don't engage in a lot of the standard fantasy class archetypes because that's overly simplistic for what your characters evolve into. So my character started out as an archer, and now they are a dragon knight who engages in verbal intimidation. And that is their primary thing. Yeah, they still shoot the bow. She still shoots her bow at things, but she's also in the business of intimidating enemies to run away, convincing the nearby enemy, which could be a skeleton or a giant rat, whatever, to fight for you for a round, meanwhile giving support, encouragement to some other character, and then every once in a while, in extremis, not often, but every once in a while, she pulls out a two-handed claymore and decapitates something nearby. So you end up doing a lot of different things.
So as far as I know, none of the video games are multiplayer, is that correct?
That is correct.
And so how do they deal with that is it sort of like Talisman? Are you both going in different parts? Or are you always together? Or how do they deal with this?
So there are the battles, and the battles play out kind of sort of within striking distance of Too Many Bones. You've got dice, you're managing dice and exhausting them. There's a new cooldown thing, so most of the dice you use in Too Many Bones are just used once, except for your standard attack dice. That actually led to one of the common criticisms of Too Many Bones, which is to say that just normal generic attack and defense dice are vastly better than a lot of your class dice. Additionally, one of the criticisms of Too Many Bones was that because all of your dice get exhausted, you don't end up to use the cool weird things as often. But in Elder Scrolls, there's a cooldown stat, and so your new dice cycle in. That part is great. So I think it's a solid evolution of the Too Many Bones sort of archetype. And then there's what happens in terms of the overall adventuring. Too Many Bones was remarkably simple and straightforward. You'd pull a card, there'd be a text of narrative adventure. Sometimes you'd have a fight, sometimes you wouldn't, but that would be about it. And in the context of the Elder Scrolls, there's a broader guild quest that sort of hangs everything together, and there's a global map that you move around. You go to towns, and you can do town actions. There are side quests. You do random events over the course of the individual map. And so over the course of our 4-hour session, again, first time playing, I could easily see it getting down to around 3. Because some of the different rules mechanisms I had to constantly look up to make sure that I was following the procedure correctly. We had 4 fights. And that is a very different balance from what you would do in a game of Too Many Bones. In a 90 to 120 minute game of Too Many Bones, if you're really cooking, you're going to have a lot more fights than that. But by the same token, that's one of the things that I found kind of grindingly annoying about Too Many Bones, just the constant setting up of new battles. Another baddie queue, another group of enemies, another set of them flooding into this small map. So we've got bigger maps, both in terms of the battle and in terms of the world. It's really blown up the formula and makes it feel more like a broader world.
I was going to say, they seem very different, whereas Too Many Bones is very linear. You're just working yourself through the deck. So it's just, now you're going to fight, now you're going to do this. Where how you've explained it is that they seem to very much capture that sandboxy feel where they have that overarching sort of adventure that you need to move around and try to discover. But as you do that, side quests pop up that you may or may not want to do.
Sandbox is possibly a little broader than I'd go, but yes, you're right. It is vastly more open. The time pressure to complete the primary quest in our particular case was a little pointed because at some point there were these antagonists following us around the map. And if they caught up with us, we would have a fight for which there would be no rewards. And that is not something we wanted to contemplate because just healing back up between fights can be tricky at times.
That might be a reward to some, Mark.
Thanks, Walker. It's your sunny optimism that makes me glad to share this business venture with you. And so ultimately, I am very satisfied overall with the package. I had my doubts because, big sprawling games like this, especially if it's going to be asking that level of time commitment, it's very tricky. So I appreciated and enjoyed my 4 hours with the Elder Scrolls. I'd be inclined to play again, and that is high praise for a fantasy adventure format, because most games of this ilk, even ones that are 90 to 120 minutes, I often find repetitive and boring. And so I'm very glad to have played it. It's not quite as wide open as a game of the Elder Scrolls. If what you really appreciate about the Elder Scrolls games is just wandering around the woods for hours, you're not going to get that in the context of this board game. I don't know that any board game could give you that sense of experience. But if what you like is customizing a very unique set of different skills to accomplish different kinds of goals and just generating your own kind of jack-of-all-trades fixer kind of things, that's one of the joys that I get out of the Bethesda role-playing games generally. I was surprised by the extent to which the Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era did that. The writing is okay. It doesn't really sell the universe particularly well. It's relying a lot on you already appreciating some of the fantasy conventions. Like, no one's going to tell you what a Redguard is in the context of the Elder Scrolls. No one's going to tell you about the Khajiit or their naming conventions or things of that nature. So I think it is better for pre-existing fans of the video game. I cannot comment on what someone uninitiated in the game would respond, because I played the video games as well as I played it with Ilupo, and so he already played the video games as well. But I was very pleasantly surprised. I came in with modest expectations, and I was very pleased. And I'm looking forward to playing some more and developing some more weird skill lines for my character that don't match anything else that she's done before. So that is the Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era, recently fulfilled by Chip Theory Games. Speaking
of things recently fulfilled, crowdfunding, we got to play Storm Raiders. This is designed by Shem Phillips and put out by Arcus Games. At its core, it is a pick up and deliver mechanism game, except that you don't get to hold the contracts to yourself personally. They're on the board, and so it's a race to get there first. Hopefully, you're trying to get other ones different than other players. And this is all in a 12 action game. And action consists of moving somewhere and picking up goods, or moving somewhere and fulfilling a contract. And within those 12 actions, you also have to rest, because you know what happens when you do this stuff, Mark?
Walker, what happens when you do this stuff?
You take a damage.
I was just asking a question, Walker.
You take a damage.
Oh.
Take a damage.
Damn it.
So you have 3 vehicles that somehow move with you every time you do this. You have a buggy, a plane, and a sub.
Yeah, everything moves as a convoy no matter where you're going. I want to know what the plane and buggy are doing while you're doing the sub, and why you would haul a sub.
It's a transformer, Mark. It transforms into the vehicle that you need that particular time.
You never told me that. That is burying the lead. How dare you? This is how I am more outraged than when I discovered that there is a grand strategic diplomacy-based Napoleonics war game published by Columbia last year, and no one told me.
So, this game is dripping with theme. The art.
Well, maybe if you haul your sub out and put it on the back of a buggy, it's
true.
dripping.
That part, maybe that part notwithstanding, the art gives you this post-apocalyptic feel. You have this giant tornado that's ripping through the landscape. That's unearthing
a storm, if you will,
that you raid. That's unearthing all of this different cargo that you have to pick up and take to different places.
Cargo sometimes.
Sometimes.
Other times sub go or plane go.
Just so. Anyway, all within an hour. I think it accomplishes a lot within that time frame. There's a lot of randomness there between what, discs are going to come up for contracts and what cargo is going to be spit out by the tornado. But it's an interesting game of trying to keep your vehicles not so damaged, because every time you want to move them, you have to place dice there as well as the damage. And so you're doing this, manipulation around with crew cards and special abilities on all the vehicles. I played it twice. Both times I enjoyed it. Mark, what did you think of Storm Raiders?
It was okay. I think I'd enjoy it more if with subsequent plays we could really get it closer to 60 minutes, maybe a little bit under 60 minutes, because as you say, there's only 12 actions to do. And there is a fair amount of randomness, I have to say. Just whether the lay of the land is going to lend itself to having a very, very juicy contract directly adjacent to the specific goods that are required to satisfy that contract, or if by the other token you end up on a portion of land where by virtue of the draw of contracts and goods, there's nothing valuable and it's really hard to get out of there. Like, I spent the entire game never using sub-movement because all I did was I just puttered around the same 3 areas of the board because there kept being the resources and contracts necessary for me to do that. Now, yes, there's still the dice management and so forth, but I felt like I never really was interacting with the board in a substantive way because I was just being reactive to the fortunate draws that were giving me what I needed at the time that I needed them. And so I didn't know that it really bears much playing time past 75 minutes, to be frank.
No, I that's why I said when we were setting it up and I did the rules thing, that's why I was very particular on how much time it took, because I felt when I read the rules and sort of sussed out how the game was going to be played, I knew that was going to be part of it.
Yeah.
Like, if this game didn't get done in 60 minutes, then it was going to be an issue.
I agree.
Now, I can't speak for the standard edition, but the deluxe edition that I have, man, does it shine on the table, because you have this 2-layer board where all the, tiles, slot in for the different vehicles, spots for all the dice, first player marker, the giant tornado that goes around the board. It's a fantastic looking game.
I don't know about fantastic. It's pretty good. I was a little disappointed by the fact that there's actually less theme and flavor than I would have imagined. Like, for example, the crew cards. There's a large deck of crew cards, and there's a whole bunch of just portraits of people. They don't have names. They don't have, like, interesting epithets attached to them or sobriquets or whatever. It's just, I didn't really get a good sense of the universe. Like, the strongholds that we go to, the strongholds don't have names either. We just place discs on them without anything.
Well, I like to double down on that, on the disappointment of the crew deck as well. Only because it's just the same crew doubled up.
Yeah, there's a lot of duplicates.
So it's like 2 decks and you sort of shuffle them together.
And a cynic might think that there is a considerable artistic difference between the 2 different styles of portrait, and that might indicate that there are some real-world insertions into the deck. But I am not a cynic, so I would never dream of mentioning such a thing.
I've never said before that I hate putting friends into games and the designers' faces into games. I definitely don't hate that. But overall, I'm very happy with Storm Raiders, and I'm looking forward to playing it more.
I thought it was okay. I'm glad to have played it. I'd be willing to play it again to see whether we can get the time.
And just talk about the dice a little bit more, because there, especially in the second game, there was definitely a thought process going into drafting the dice. You roll the 12, depending on how many players, you're going to have 2 dice per player and then 1 extra at the end, because that's going to dictate how far the tornado moves. And there was much thought put into the second game about which dice needed to get drafted because you didn't want to be in the path, and figuring out how far you needed to move and stuff like that.
Oh, sure. A little more tension there would be nice. I never really felt a strong pressure in terms of what dice to draft or in what contexts, but I could easily imagine in a slightly different setup or a different role. Again, there's a lot of variability going on. In this particular case, the variability led to the game being less interesting, but if it led to there being more tension and more trade-offs, I definitely appreciate that.
Storm Raiders.
And those are the games we played last week. Now a quick break while we pay some bills. And we're back. Now on to the news and why it doesn't matter.
Well, Mythic Games is in trouble again. I'm not going to go too much into it. They're a crowdfunding company that is in constant trouble of fulfilling their games.
So they extorted me for additional shipping money to get Wave 1 of Darkest Dungeon. I gave them their blood money. They gave me that monstrous thing that is Darkest Dungeon. I was tempted to use a different noun, but this is a family show, Walker. And then they wanted more money for my Wave 2 rewards. And given how much detestation I had for the entire process and for the game itself, I never gave them the money, and so consequently there are some Wave 2 rewards that I paid for that I never got. And now it's on Amazon.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying specifically mine. Like, you can't go on Amazon and find Mark's copy of the expansion, but one of them is. One of them is, Walker. I don't want it. Just to be clear, I don't want it.
But it's there.
But I resent that I don't have it.
So I don't want to go too much into it because I didn't read too much in it, but I think they paid for the license for Monsterpocalypse. They did a huge crowdfunding for Monsterpocalypse, and now they're not fulfilling it, so they've given back the license back to the company that originally had it.
What a troubled license. I mean, at one point, there was supposed to be a movie. The movie rights were optioned, and there was some talk of it actually being in pre-production, but that went away. And it's a shame, because Monsterpocalypse was a pretty good game. Just never really...
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah, I had bought it. It was one of these booster packs. You'd buy a pre-painted booster pack, would have random stuff in it, even buildings that looked pretty cool.
The buildings were really cool.
And it was one of these, quick setup, nice, solid rules, head-to-head. Anyway, something good that came out of it, Mark. Mythic put out a game called Reichbusters. Fortunately, it was given to Monolith, which is a different company, and now they're putting out a new Reichbusters game. Oh. This is going to be called Reloaded. I'm hoping that there's going to be sort of we already have Reichbusters upgrade pack or something that I don't have to rebuy this. It's going to be like a new sort of intro set with a little bit changed up rules, make it a little more streamlined. More Reichbusters, in my opinion, is good Reichbusters.
Literary news now. Amabel Holland, the designer and publisher of Hollandspiel, has published a book in January called Cardboard Ghosts. And this is about how board games can serve as a way to make evident the broader social systems and structures that underlie or possibly even haunt a lot of our social and cultural facts on the ground. This is published by CRC Press. I am eager to read it. It has gotten some glowing reviews from Matt Leacock, among other people. And Amabel Holland is a very fascinating designer with fascinating things to say, and I look forward to hearing more about her thoughts.
Segue. Speaking of Matt Leacock, he's putting out a new pandemic-type game, Mark. It's Lord of the Rings, Fate of the Fellowship. This is coming out by Z-Man Games, like I said, designed by Matt Leacock. It's going to be sort of a pandemic-style Lord of the Rings game. We'll see.
One of my favorite tabletop miniatures designers is Mike Hutchinson. He is the designer, of course, of Gaslands and A Billion Suns. And he's been very, very active of late. I talked about some of his announced projects, and a lot of these projects are coming along. If you back him on Patreon, even at a relatively low level, you get access to all his beta rule sets for free through itch.io. And one of them is Spacekits, which is a hybrid miniatures dexterity game, which no one has been willing to play with me. A whole bunch of people who either look down their nose at the dexterity element or who don't want to play with little plastic dolls. I am very frustrated at the fact you poo-pooed Spacekits when I told you about it.
I don't think so.
There was some poo-pooing of the Spacekits. I am extraordinarily frustrated. Neither Chip the Third nor the Handwerker has expressed any willingness to play Spacekits.
I think you made it up. I'd play that in a second. Dexterity game.
Okay, we need to play Spacekits then. Up on crowdfunding now by Mike Hutchinson is a role-playing game called Crawling Chaos. Now, what's novel about Crawling Chaos is that it is a vaguely Lovecraftian-themed RPG where there are many game masters and a single player. The single player is the protagonist, and the many game masters serve to drive them insane. That is the basic structure of the game. The many game masters take turns pitching terrible scenarios at the player, and the player desperately tries to navigate them for as long as possible to their inevitable demise. I very much appreciate this structure. I've read the rules. It looks fascinating. I might get it to the table, but then again, the primary demands on our role-playing time has been Durant's. A number of locals want to try Durant's, and that is absolutely one of our favorites. But Mike Hutchinson is a fascinating designer with a lot of interesting projects that are going on, and one of them is up down crowdfunding. I am backing Crawling Chaos.
Yeah, we have no role-playing games that we want to get started, or, we don't want to play Durance. We don't have, a whole system for... We're talking about wanting to play Paranoia. I've already pitched it to the guy. He said he's going to do it. We don't want to play the last Airbender role-playing system that we, have, or the Tidal Blades role-playing system.
I was talking about me, but I'm interested in.
All right. I still have Endless Winter. It was a huge crowdfunding campaign, and now they're going to put out another expansion for it in the upcoming fourth quarter. I'm hoping to get it to the table more, but if you enjoyed Endless Winter, more to come.
It never ends.
Speaking of games that we enjoy, Rebel Princess is getting a new expansion called Happily Ever After. More princesses, more stuff. Rebel Princesses was great, so more is better, as I have said.
That is the news, and why it doesn't matter. We now move on to our feature game, which is SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This was designed by Tomáš Halek, published by Czech Games Edition. Tomáš Halek has published 3 games with 3 different publishers in 2024, one of them being SETI, one of them being Teagarden, and one of them being Galileo Galilei. So that's 2 for 3 for space. Walker, why don't you give us an unhelpful summary about what one does in SETI?
Lots to do in SETI, Mark. It's travel through space, you're developing tech, you're scanning space, you're probing planets, either, in orbit or on the surface, you're discovering aliens. SETI has a very Gaia project feel to it. The resources are very tight, and the better you make your engine, the more resources you get, the longer your turns will be, because you pass out of a round, and then you just get to take actions by yourself, the better your engine is.
Michel, does one pass out or does one swoon upon the SETI?
That's awful. So there's.
Oh, he's not done. He's not done being unhelpful. There's more unhelpful stuff to
There's broadly 3 scoring opportunity categories, and it's mostly broken into the same in 3 colors, pink, yellow, and blue, and there's 3 different actions specifically assigned to each of these categories that you do in order to, use these 3 different scoring categories.
Yeah, I accept your comparison to Terra Mystica or Gaia Project in the sense that you have scarce resources, and how you manage those scarce resources will determine how long you'll be in a round. I do want to disambiguate it, though, because in SETI, you are not really building infrastructure. You're not really building anything on the map, per se. Most things are transient and just one-shots. Like, you land a probe onto a planet that just disgorges a whole bunch of points, and then you move on. You do get new technologies, that is true, but it's not really much of an engine builder in the tradition of some aspects of the Terra Mystica system, much less one of its close thematic colleagues, Terraforming Mars. It does have some similarities to Terraforming Mars, just to be clear, in that it is kind of a near-future, not very speculative science fiction kind of vibe, especially from the cards. All the cards are different projects that are either scientifically grounded or based on very near scientific speculation, and there's some interesting flavor text for a lot of them as well. Even the alien races and or civilizations and or, let's just say, extraterrestrial stuff that you encounter, some of it is scientifically grounded. Like, for example, one of them is based on the Oumuamua asteroid thing, stellar object, that was the subject of a great deal of speculation a few years ago. And, I mean, that is actually a thing. Now, we don't have any evidence that there are extraterrestrial fossils on it, as is presented in the game, but nonetheless, it is still kind of in that broad oeuvre of somewhat grounded in science.
So like I talked about the last time we played it, it is a nice teach, because the rulebook is solid, and the components are solid. You have a player board that has all of the actions that are available to you, and everyone has a very small, easy-to-read booklet that surmises all of these actions. And so what you need to do, so what you can do is all sort of nicely on your board, so you can figure out what's there, a place to put your text, and a place to sort of line up your data that's going to give you some free resources. So the action board, very useful.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about free resources, because that's one of the things where SETI is very much of its peer group, because it's not quite super combo-tastic in the sense that, you're keying off of a whole bunch of text that you've developed, and you're keying off of a whole bunch of infrastructure you've already laid out, as I said. But it is very combo-tastic in the sense that because resources are so tight, that one marginal credit, or one marginal data, or one marginal popularity, one marginal anything is so crucial to whether or not you're going to be able to do the thing during the round, that you do end up in situations where I'm doing this, which triggers this, which gets me the other thing, which finally gets me the resource that I need. And by virtue of that, by virtue of this very long turn of shoving a whole bunch of other pieces around, next turn I will then do the very simple thing, which disgorges a huge quantity of points. So it's not that every turn is very long and complicated and involved. It's just sometimes the exigencies of the scarcity force you to engage in those kinds of combinatorics anyway.
Yeah, it's a neat sort of puzzly thing to figure out. It's like, I need that one energy. Well, how can I get that energy? Well, if I play this card, it'll allow me to do this other action, which will allow me to, loop this orbit around, which will say that if I have these 3 orbits done, then I get a free energy, and now I have that energy that I need to do this other thing, like you said.
Yeah.
Multi-use cards does this in a great way. You've got cards out in the display that are going to help you, tell you where you can scan. You have same cards in your hand that you can use for free actions. They have the same sort of thing where every card has a resource in the top left corner that you can just discard away to get that resource, which is a huge hit because all of those cards also have sort of like an action that you get to do on them that are usually fairly powerful, that get you more resources and points and stuff in the future. I really like how they use these multi-use cards.
The cards are really well done, and it does let you engage in just the pleasant delusion of thinking that you're going to get exactly what you need every time you go pull another card. It's like, oh, I would love to have one more popularity. Ooh, I might be able to get a card that... Oh, no, it doesn't have what I want. Okay.
I also forgot to say, it also has the income symbol in the bottom right-hand corner, and sometimes you're trying to cycle through cards because you want a particular type of income, not only because you want to get that income this turn, because when you slide it in as income, you get that resource right away. That will leave you in the turn longer. It'll get you that income at the end of the round. And it will also help you sometimes to achieve some goals and or some goal cards that you have in front of you. So lots of things going on.
Yeah, the frequency with which I would engage in considerable effort just to slot in an income card because I desperately needed that extra credit now is, I think, a testament to that scarcity that I was talking about. Yeah, the credit... One more credit every round going off in the future, that was helpful too. But mostly I was thinking about how, well, I've got 2 credits. I would kill my mother for a 3rd, so let me see what I can do to get this done.
So let's talk about some of the...
Okay, maybe not my mother. Your mother, maybe.
Yikes. We're going to do mother jokes. Sweet.
No, that's not a your mama joke. A your mama joke is something else very specific. I mean, okay, I will grant you that this is your mama adjacent. And if I were engaging in a your mama joke, I might talk about what adjacency your mother looks like. But I'm not making a your mama joke, so I'm not going to.
Yikes.
Michel, you appear to be agitated. Why don't you join me on the veranda and have a mint julep while relaxing on the settee?
You're going to just keep grinding that in.
Walker, we are both of the same disposition. If we have a joke, we are going to drive it into the ground. This is known. It's kind of our brand. It would be an insult to our listeners if I didn't drive it into the ground.
It is known.
I have too much respect for our listeners to do that, Walker. I have too much respect for your mother to do that. What were we talking about?
I don't even know. I've lost. Where am I?
Okay.
All right, let's talk about some actions, Mark. So, launching a probe is an action, because this leads into things that are kind of odd in the game. So you launch a probe, and you move the probe around space, and you can either turn that probe into a lander, which will land on a planet, which is another action, or you can turn it into a satellite. That is a different action. It's the movement I find weird, because there's no action to actually move this probe. They decided to make moving this probe sort of, you get to do it in all sorts of different ways. There's text that will once in a while let you move the probe. You can spend energy whenever you want, which is super expensive because it's one of those resources that's tight.
Yep.
Will let you move the probe around. And there's so many different reasons why you want to do this, because every time you move the probe to something interesting, people think that's cool. You get popular. And so you go up this other track, which is the one that lets you do text, which is another action that you get to do. So you get so popular, you spend some of that popularity. It's called something else. So it's publicity, and so there's all these different texts that go into your player board that modify all of these actions that you're talking about. Either makes them better, cheaper, more useful. Also, there are lots of goals and or goal cards that want you to have certain texts. So lots of things there.
But fundamentally, there are 3 ways to score points. As you say, there are these purple, blue, and yellow scoring opportunities. So yellow you get when you land a lander onto a planet, most of the time. Sometimes you land onto a moon. They tend to do other things. They tend to just be more points, but they're somewhat disjuncted from the yellow markers. The blue markers you get from acquiring data. And you acquire data in a variety of ways, mostly from scanning. And if you win area majorities for scanning, you get to promote pink markers. Now, this all dovetails with the way alien species work, and I think we can get to that in a minute. But the more I play SETI, the more I'm dissatisfied with the way the area majority part works. When SETI is being mostly multiplayer solitaire, it works fine. The one area of direct competition is precisely in this aspect of the area majority for scanning. So a given sector will have some number of scanning opportunities, from 4 to 8. And when it has been fully scanned, whoever has scanned the most gets a benefit, specifically this pink scoring opportunity, which tends, this being a combo-tastic medium-heavy Euro over the past few years, to dovetail with a whole bunch of other scoring conditions about how many pink markers you have out. And so consequently, it can be significant. The problem is that your ability to place these markers is relatively coarse, like you're placing 1 or 2 at a time, broadly speaking, maybe 3 if you're supremely lucky and you've upgraded things. And the tie is broken by whoever got there last. And I find the incentive structure sufficiently weird and unsatisfying. Like, you can be in a position where you've spent several rounds laying in influence in a particular sector, and it is almost impossible to protect yourself from being sniped. And then, again, the incentives for getting there early aren't sufficiently pressing to let you set up for other people to do that sometimes. That is the one aspect of SETI where you have direct competition, and I don't think they did it very well.
Yeah, because winning all out, like if you go all out and try to complete it yourself, you're not gaining anything extra. You know, it's
and even then you still might get sniped.
It's true.
Like you can have 3 markers out on a sector and be halfway towards completing it, figure that thing's mine, and then suddenly it's gone. Like it's very, very strange, in part because it's this last. Now, look, first person there winning the tie would lead to other degeneracies. That would lead to more circumstances where one player has to go and does it alone. But I think they could have massaged and finessed things a little bit to make it a little bit more interesting, rather than feeling arbitrary and unsatisfying, which is how I often feel those competitions are. Now, the data that you get from scanning and the way that interacts with the rest of the game is very good. But that specific aspect, the competition for pink scoring opportunities, I don't think is very well done.
Yeah, like Mark said, you get this data, it goes into this little hold, and then you have sort of a machine on the bottom that you get to upgrade with text, and then you sort of like get to put in these little blue discs, and you get to, you know, if you have upgraded, it's going to get you more of these resources that make it better for you to do other things, but you need to fill that line so you can run the machine.
And then you get a blue scoring opportunity
that can go in the track. And once a track has one of each color, you get to flip over the fancy alien.
Which may or may not be an alien.
You've discovered...
I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens.
You've discovered an alien, and that will open up all sorts of new places to put these pink, blue, and yellow markers that will get you cards that are a little bit more powerful than the regular cards.
Well, they introduce a whole bunch of new mechanisms that are modular and relatively straightforward. There's a little bit of wrapping your head around how some of these work sometimes, and sometimes you have to make reference to the specific sheets summarizing how the aliens work. But overall, I think the novelty to randomness to rules grit ratios are mostly in the right place. I think it adds a little bit of something to SETI, a little bit of a moment of drama, a little bit of a shift, a little bit of opening up new horizons, and I think it's mostly well done. There's one exception, though, and that is that for most of the factions, the way that it works is when they're revealed, you get something, mostly cards, based on the number of markers you have there. So if the race gets revealed, or the aliens or whatever alien tile it is gets revealed and you're not there, you don't get anything. But if you are there, if you put in the work, you start with a leg up. But then there's one in particular where everyone gets some of the cool alien stuff. You just get slightly more if you got there. That was a strange bit of asymmetry that felt unsatisfying to me. There are reasons for why it works that way. There are broader track-related reasons and balance issues. It just felt disappointing. It might be disappointing to go all in or heavily into that faction, expecting some sort of tremendous bonus, and just getting a slight nudge as opposed to the other ones.
And we haven't even talked about this rotating solar system. So there's like 4 rings to the solar system. And throughout the game, there are all sorts of different things that are going to make these spin around individually. There's a little track that goes, yellow, blue, pink, yellow, blue, pink. As it goes around, that particular ring will rotate. And it's mostly in gaining a tech is the concrete way for this to do this, or the first person that passes when they do that rotates it. But what this does is it sometimes makes movement easier or harder, depending, because there's asteroid fields out there which are harder to move through. It also affects scanning. So if you've set up your turn in order to scan a certain sector, well, too bad. Earth's moved, or whatever planet you're scanning from is moved, and now it's no longer in range. So you get to wait 13 turns for it to come all the way back around.
In its defense, I found that it was seldom the case that something would shift twice before I could take advantage of something. Very frequently, it would be the case that you look at the map and figure, this isn't really good, this isn't really where I want to be. I need to wait for circumstances to change. I think only once over the entire course of our playings of SETI was it the case that I wanted something to change, but it changed twice before I was then able to act. Most of the time, it's at a much more stately pace.
But it gives the nice feel of this, moving galaxy.
It's a cute physical gimmick. It varies things up, and it is an interesting thing to plan around, yeah.
And there is a small chance that sometimes your probe actually gets pushed because there's gaps in the rings. It's not all there are full rings that rotate every time. There's some gaps in them. So if you placed your probe in a gap and then it rotates, it actually pushes you to a different area. And like we said before, all these different planets and comets have, people enjoy when you, scan them or move through them. And so
it's good publicity.
It ups your publicity. So I don't know. I just wish there was a different way to move your probe because that energy resource is so scarce and it's just so hard to move your probes around the map. But I guess that's just part of it, right? It has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The aspect where I think it suffers, I don't find the movement so disappointing. It makes it so that I find it difficult to justify launching satellites as opposed to landing onto a planet because you've already spent so much energy getting there. Why would you settle for the second best thing? Why not just sink the more valuable point things? I don't feel like bootstrapping after having engaged in that Herculean effort. I want to get the huge point reward.
Yeah, and like you said, it has this weird thing. If you do orbit a satellite, then it makes landing an orbiter there cheaper. So I get to move another probe all the way out there somehow?
Or randomly make things easier for somebody else who showed up, yeah. Yeah, overall, when it comes to this style of game, again, the medium-heavy, somewhat combo-tastic, resource-scarce efficiency Euro, I think that SETI, for the most part, gets most of the things right. I would have been happy, as per usual in games of this ilk, with a little bit more player interaction, but the scoring is reasonably cohesive and coherent. There's, broadly speaking, 3 different classes of scoring opportunities, and that's more or less where the bulk of your points are going to come from. There's obviously a lot of other nickel and diming points. There are the endgame goal points, but they too tend to focus on areas related to those 3 color scoring areas. And I don't like the area majority bit, but it's not a huge element of things. And the cards and the different alien boards add a fair amount of flavor and interest to what could have otherwise been somewhat pedestrian. I'm not a huge fan of how long it is. It's a solid 2 hours with 3 players, more with 4, slightly less with 2. And you're not really going to be doing a whole heck of a lot different after the alien reveals happen. The alien reveals add a little bit of texture to the arc of the game. So I'd be happier if, 20 minutes were shaved off the playtime. But as it is, I'm reasonably pleased with SETI. And I think for people who like games of this ilk, like a lot of the Euros that CGE has been releasing, like Underwater Cities, will find a lot to like in SETI.
Agreed. I love how big the deck is. There's hardly ever once that I had said, oh, here's this card again. I don't think I ever had that once. And the fact that not only that, you add in the alien cards on top of that, so it's even more variety. Anyway, like you said, lots to like. Glad that I picked it up. Would play again.
So that's SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, designed by Tomasz Halek and published by CGE. And that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us for So Very Wrong About Games. We would not be able to make this... No, that's not true. We would be able to make the show if no one listened. It would be a little stupid, though, to make the show and if no one listened.
It'd be awkward.
It would change the parameters of things. Yeah. At any rate, please take care of yourselves, take care of your hobby, thank your rules explainer, and we hope to see you again next week.
Peace! We could, we wouldn't have to actually record it. We could just pretend
That's a good point. That's good. That would simplify the technical aspects.
Save a lot of memory space.
Yeah. It would definitely make editing kind of a pointless.
And we wouldn't have to spend all the money on these mics. We could just put a cardboard mic up there. And
You buy these? I just steal them.
Oh.
You've been listening to So Very Wrong About Games, a board gaming podcast about board games produced by Michael Walker and edited by Mark Big. You can find all our information at SoWrongGames.com. Special thanks to What Does It Eat for allowing us to use their most excellent song, FOS, as our intro. You can find them at WhatDoesItEat.com. We hope to see you again soon, and as always, try to be right, but remember you're so very wrong.